In late December of 537, ships with supplies and reinforcements reached Rome. Due to the treaty established between the Goths and the Romans, they were unhindered by the Gothic force. Hildiger, the son-in-law of Belisarius' wife Antonina, arrived with a contingent of Libyan horsemen. Due to a lack of supplies, the Goths had abandoned Portus, Kentum-Kelly, and Albano. Seizing the opportunity, the Romans took these cities. The Goths were now effectively surrounded by the Romans. They protested these actions. They told Belisarius it was unfair that the Romans had taken these cities, because Witigis had withdrawn the garrisons for other reasons. They demanded that Belisarius give them back, but Belisarius dismissed these claims as mere pretexts and continued to hold these cities. Belisarius then sent the general John with a force of 1,000 cavalrymen to the region of Picenum with orders to attack the Gothic positions if the Goths had broken the treaty. Back in Rome, the Goths had secretly attempted to enter the city by an aqueduct, but this was thwarted by the Romans. They then assaulted the Pinciana Gate in the north of the city, but Hildiger and his men routed them, and many Goths were slaughtered. The treaty was now effectively broken, and Belisarius ordered John to raid Picenum with his cavalry force. He plundered the countryside, but was confronted by a sizable Gothic force commanded by Eulythius, the uncle of Witigis. John soundly defeated them, and Eulythius was killed in the fray. He captured the towns of Ortona and Aternum, and moved north, passing by the Gothic held Urbino and Osimo, straight to Rimini. This left hostile Gothic cities and garrisons in his rear, something that Belisarius had explicitly warned against. When John arrived in Rimini, the Goths fled, enabling him to take the city without a fight. When Witigis heard that Rimini was taken, he ordered the withdrawal of the Gothic force besieging Rome, for fear that Ravenna was in danger due to its proximity to Rimini. Belisarius saw that the enemy was withdrawing, and waited for the most opportune time to attack, then rushed out of the Pinciana Gate in the north of the city. Both sides struggled to gain the upper hand, but eventually the Goths began to flee in panic, losing many soldiers in the process. Although he had lost a considerable portion of his force, Witigis was able to reach Ravenna, and he began to strengthen and fortify his position in the region. He then set off with a large Gothic force to besiege Rimini. In response to this, Belisarius sent a cavalry force of 1,000 men under the commanders Hildiger and Martin to aid John in Rimini. They met some resistance in the mountainous region near Urbino, at a Gothic-held fortress called Petra. But they were able to take this position and move to Ancona, a city already under Roman control. There they gathered some infantrymen and headed to Rimini. They arrived there before Witigis and the Goths, and ordered that John evacuate the city and come with them. Not only did John refuse this order, but he also demanded that they leave some infantry with him to bolster his forces. Unable to persuade John to leave Rimini, they gave in to his demands and departed. Witigis arrived at Rimini with his entire army. He constructed a siege tower and sent it towards the walls, but it became stuck in a trench that surrounded the city, and the Goths began to pull the tower back. At this moment, John and his men burst out from the gates and killed many of the Goths as they were drawing away from the trench. Fearing further losses, Witigis did not make another direct attempt on the city and stayed at a distance, hoping to starve out the Romans and force them to surrender. Meanwhile, in Milan, Dacius, the bishop of the city, sent Belisarius a message informing him that the Goths were of a weak position in the region of Liguria. He urged Belisarius to send a military force to Milan, adding that they could easily take all of Liguria. In response to this, Belisarius sent an army under the general Mandilla by sea to the north. They put in at Genoa and traveled overland to Pavia, where they met a Gothic force. The Goths were soundly defeated, and they retreated behind the walls of the city. The Romans then bypassed Pavia and continued to Milan, where they quickly occupied the city. Mandilla pushed further north and took the cities of Bergamo, Como, Novara, and some others. Perceiving this, Witigis sent a large army to Liguria under his nephew Uriah. The king of the Franks in Austrasia, Theudebert, sent a force of 10,000 of his Burgundian allies to join the Goths. This was a treacherous move by the Franks, as they had previously pledged to aid the Romans. However, Theudebert claimed that these Burgundians were acting of their own volition and were merely volunteers whom he had no control over. This was an outright lie. When the Goths and Burgundians joined forces, they marched towards Milan. Mandilla and 300 of his own men rushed to Milan to defend it. They were able to reach the city before the combined force of the Goths and Burgundians. However, when the enemy arrived, they could see that they were hopelessly outnumbered. It was the end of the winter of 538, and the barbarians surrounded the city. Back in Rome, in the summer of 538, Belisarius marched out of the city and took the settlements of Todi and Chiusi. Subsequently, Witigis sent a force south to Osimo to join up with the Gothic force stationed there, then proceeded to the Roman-held Ancona. Conan, who was in command of the garrison there, went out to meet the Goths, but when his men saw how numerous the enemy were, they fled back to the city, and many were cut down by the Goths in the process. The Goths ravaged the settlements outside of the city, and assaulted the walls with ladders. The Romans fought back fiercely, and were able to just barely push back the Gothic onslaught. Shortly after, a Roman army under the eunuch Narses arrived at Picenum with a total of 7,000 men. Belisarius met with Narses and Fermo, and they debated on what action to take regarding John's situation at Rimini. John had defiantly ignored Belisarius' orders in leaving Gothic positions in his rear and not withdrawing from Rimini. Many Roman officers thought that John deserved no help, and was in this predicament because of his own doing. Also, they reasoned that if they helped John in Rimini, they would be vulnerable to assaults in their rear from the very positions that John had left unmolested when he advanced to Rimini. Narses began to speak in favor of helping John, and just as he was finished speaking, a message arrived from John in Rimini. It updated Narses and Belisarius on his current situation. In it, John informed them that his supplies were exhausted and that he would have to surrender in 7 days if he did not receive aid. This greatly alarmed Belisarius, and he was uncertain at first on the best course of action to take, but he shortly sprung into action. He sent 1,000 Romans near the Gothic-held Osimo to check a possible Gothic attack from that city. He then loaded troops on ships and commanded them to sail directly to Rimini, and summoned another army under Martin to march along the coast, while he and Narses proceeded by a more inland route to the city. Belisarius marched through the mountains where he encountered and defeated a small party of Goths. The surviving Goths fled to Witigis and informed him that Belisarius was approaching from the mountains. Upon hearing this, the Goths focused their attention on the mountains in the east, thinking that this was the only direction that the Romans were approaching from. But unbeknownst to the Goths, Martin's army reached the vicinity of the city from the south around nightfall. Belisarius had instructed Martin to light many more campfires than was necessary, to give the appearance that his army was much larger than it actually was. Seeing the numerous campfires, the Goths were becoming worried that they would be surrounded by daybreak, and at dawn, when they saw the Roman fleet approaching by sea, they were thrown into utter panic and fled to Ravenna.